Today, I'm going to tell you a story so dangerous it cost everything, set deep in the American Old West, where dust hangs heavy in the air and choices can get you killed. This is a land where loyalty and survival collide, and where a single wrong step can ignite a war between worlds. It all began with one quiet meeting by a creek, small, innocent, and easy to ignore, yet powerful enough to shatter families, expose lies, and change 2 lives forever. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Arizona Territory, 1872. Sunlit dust drifted in soft ribbons through the front windows of Whitlock's General Store, the late-day glow catching each mote like sparks at sundown. Elara Whitlock stood behind the smooth oak counter, slender fingers moving across a leather ledger as she tallied the day's sales with careful precision. At 20, she carried herself with a calm grace that outpaced her years. Honey blonde hair was pinned neatly beneath a plain bonnet, her spine straight despite the long hours pressing down on her shoulders. "Elara," her father's voice called from the storeroom, firm and unmistakable. "Make sure the new coffee and sugar shipments are marked before we close." "Yes, father," she answered evenly, ever the dutiful daughter. Orson Whitlock stepped out from the back, wiping his hands on his apron. He was a man who had carved his standing from the frontier, supplying miners, settlers, and soldiers alike, and he wore that success with practiced confidence. The deep lines around his eyes spoke of hard sun and harder choices. "Captain Voss is coming to supper tonight," he said, the words carrying weight beyond small talk. "He's been promoted. Major now. Your mother's putting together something special." Elara's pen paused. Ink pooled for a heartbeat on the page. Major Garrick Voss had been calling more often these past months, each visit sharper in intent than the last. At 35, the decorated officer was well regarded across the territory for his handling of the Apache problem. A solid match, folks said. Secure, prosperous, connected. Everything a frontier girl was supposed to want. "I've still got plenty to finish here," Elara said without looking up. Orson's palm came down on the counter. "That can wait. This matters. Times are changing," he went on. "The railroad's coming. Law's coming. The right connections will carry us into what this place is becoming." Before Elara could answer, the shop bell rang, and the door swung open. 3 Apache men filled the doorway, their presence shifting the air at once. They wore a mix of traditional dress and worn settler cast-offs, standing proud despite the need that brought them to trade. Orson's manner changed in an instant. A merchant's smile settled in place. "Afternoon," he said briskly. "What can I do for you?" The eldest stepped forward. "We bring skins, trade for flour, coffee." His English was rough but clear, his eyes alert. As Orson began to bargain, Elara noticed the youngest of the 3. Taller than the others, he met the room with a steady, unflinching gaze. His hair hung long, an eagle feather tied at the temple. A thin scar cut along his jaw, stark against bronze skin, but it was his eyes that held her. Dark as midnight, keen, taking in everything. For a breathless instant, their looks caught and held across the store. "Elara!" Orson snapped, breaking the spell. "Fetch 2 sacks of flour from the back." She moved to comply, aware of those dark eyes following her. In the storeroom, her hands trembled as she lifted the flour sacks. When she returned, the young Apache was studying a silver pocket watch displayed behind the counter. "You like the watch?" Elara asked before she could stop herself. He glanced up, surprise flickering. "It marks the white man's time," he said, his voice deeper than she expected, his English smoother than the elders. "My people keep time by the sun, the moon, the seasons." "Still," she said, setting the flour down, "you seem curious." A faint smile touched his mouth. I am curious about many things. No Kai, the elder said sharply in Apache. Enough. The young man, Tarek, stepped back, but his eyes never left Elara's. There was something there she couldn't name. A challenge, perhaps, or a question left hanging. After they left, Orson locked the door with a heavy sigh. White River Reservation, he said, as if explanation were needed. Scouts for the army, some of them. The only decent sort left. They seemed peaceful, Elara offered. Peaceful today, he replied grimly. But you remember the Sanders family. 3 months back. Every one of them scalped. He shook his head. Don't be fooled, daughter. A wolf can walk like a dog for a time, but it's still a wolf. That evening at supper, while Major Voss spoke of troop movements and railroad money, Elara's thoughts drifted to dark eyes and a voice that measured life by stars and seasons. 2 weeks slipped by. Summer heat bore down on Willow Creek until the streets shimmered. Elara began riding out at dawn, before the sun climbed high. An hour claimed for herself before the store, and her parents' plans closed in once more. That morning she rode farther than she ever had before, following the creek as it wound uphill into the low foothills, where tall cottonwoods cast long, merciful shadows. She dismounted and let her mare drink while she settled onto a sun-warmed stone, lifting off her bonnet so the faint breeze could cool her neck. You ride a long way from town, a voice said. Alone. Elara startled, nearly sliding from the rock. Across the narrow ribbon of water stood Tarek, a paint horse in hand. He wore buckskin leggings and a faded blue scout shirt left open at the throat. A rifle rested across his back, but his hands were empty, held loose at his sides, open, cautious. You startled me, she said, breathless, hastily tying her bonnet back in place. That was not my wish, he answered. He stayed where he was. The creek between them like a line neither seemed ready to cross. Are you following me? She asked, gathering her nerve. A flicker of humor crossed his face. No, I was here first. This is where I come when I need quiet. Oh. Color rose in her cheeks. Then I should leave. No. The word came quickly. The water and the shade belonged to no one. Silence stretched between them. Elara studied him openly now, the way he stood alert yet still, proud but measured, like a hawk resting high above the ground. You are the merchant's daughter, he said at last. She nodded. Elara Whitlock. Elara, he repeated, as if testing the sound. I am Tarek. My name means strength. She hesitated only a second. Are you strong? His expression sobered. I am still alive. That is strength enough these days. She found no argument there. Is it true, she asked carefully, that you scout for the army? Sometimes, he said, jaw tightening. When it helps my people, the reservation is hard, poor food, little medicine. If I guide the bluecoats to outlaw bands, I earn rations for the children, for the elders. You don't sound proud. Should a man be proud to hunt his own kin so his mother may eat? The bitterness in his voice was bare, unguarded. Elara looked down, suddenly ashamed of her clean dress, of the comfort that had never asked her to choose between loyalty and survival. I'm sorry, she said quietly. That was careless of me. He seemed taken aback by the apology. After a pause, he stepped into the creek and crossed, water barely touching his boots. Up close she noticed the amber flecks in his dark eyes, the clean line of the scar along his jaw. Why do you ride alone? He asked. It is dangerous. It's the only time I feel free, she replied, and surprised herself with the truth. Understanding passed between them like a slow current. Different worlds, different rules, yet the same sense of being confined. Different cages, but cages all the same. "I should go," she said, reaching for her reins. "They'll be wondering." Tarek nodded. As she mounted, he spoke again. "I will be here tomorrow, after sunrise." It was not quite a question, not quite an invitation, simply a fact, heavy with meaning. Elara hesitated, knowing the sensible answer, the expected one. "I ride every morning," she said instead, turning her horse back toward town. As she rode away, she felt his eyes follow her, and something unfamiliar unfurled in her chest, dangerous and bright, something that felt very much like hope. Through the heat of July and into August, the mornings became theirs. Elara rode out with first light, her explanations to her parents growing increasingly creative. Tarek waited by the creek, sometimes with fresh fish or gathered berries, sometimes with nothing but stories of his people or questions about the land beyond the territory. They were careful, always careful. They never touched. They kept a respectful distance. At first they spoke only of harmless things, weather, horses, the shifting hills, but as the days passed, the invisible boundary between them thinned. "Why do you always wear that?" Tarek asked one morning, gesturing to her bonnet as they sat beneath a towering cottonwood. Elara's fingers brushed the ribbons at her chin. "It's proper. Ladies don't show their hair in public." "The sun has never seen your hair," he said, genuinely puzzled. She laughed, a sound that came easily with him now. "Of course it has, just not often. And not when gentlemen are around. I am no gentleman," he replied with a crooked smile. "No," she said softly, "you aren't." There was no insult in it, only honesty. After a brief pause, she untied the ribbons and removed her bonnet. Her honey-blonde hair was pinned up, though loose strands escaped, catching the morning light. Tarek's expression shifted, growing intent. "Like corn silk," he said quietly. "Beautiful." The compliment lingered between them. Plain words, yet heavy with an honesty that left no place to hide. Heat crept into Elara Whitlock's cheeks, but she did not reach for her bonnet. "Tell me about your mother," she said, steering away from the moment before it could swallow her whole. Tarek's gaze drifted beyond the cottonwoods. She was a healer. She knew the plants, the prayers. His voice softened. "She died 3 winters ago. The coughing sickness traders brought." "I'm sorry," Elara said quietly, and meant it. "And your father?" she asked after a moment. "Mexican soldiers killed him when I was a boy." The words carried old hurt, stripped of bitterness. "He taught me to track, to hunt, to stand for our people." She hesitated. "Would he approve of you speaking with me?" Tarek considered her, solemn. "He would say a warrior must know both his enemies and his friends, must understand those who want our land." The question struck deeper than she expected. "Is that what I am to you?" she asked. "A way to know your enemy?" "At first," he admitted, unflinching. "Perhaps." He met her eyes. "Now I am no longer certain what you are to me, Elara Whitlock. Only that each morning I search for your horse with a hunger that has nothing to do with enemies." Something shifted. Quiet but irreversible. Elara looked down at her hands, at the faint calluses forming despite her father's insistence she wear gloves in the store. "Garrick Voss has asked my father for permission to court me," she said suddenly. "He speaks of marriage before winter." Tarek went utterly still. "The officer who led the raid at Black Mountain," he said, "who burned 3 villages." "I don't know what he's done," she replied honestly. "Only what my father sees. Security, position, a proper match." "And what do you see?" he asked. "A cage," she said without hesitation. One with gilded bars. She lifted her chin. A life where every day looks the same. Where I'm valued for obedience, not thought. Where I must pretend the voices in my heart don't exist. What do those voices say? His tone had lowered, intimate despite the open land around them. She turned toward the distant ridgeline. Dangerous things. Impossible things. Tarek moved then, closing the careful distance they had always kept. He knelt before her, not touching, yet close enough that she felt his warmth, caught the scent of sage and pine on his skin. Nothing is impossible, he said fiercely. My people have faced guns, sickness, broken treaties. They say we will fade like morning mist, yet we endure. This is different, she whispered. Is it? His eyes searched hers. Tell me you feel nothing when you ride here each morning, and I will never speak of this again. The challenge hovered between them. Elara knew the safe answer, the proper one. But when she spoke, the truth broke free. I feel everything, she confessed, and it terrifies me. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Tarek reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough with work, warm against her skin. The touch was simple, almost innocent, yet it sent a jolt through her entire body. It terrifies me as well, he said. What lies between us promises nothing but danger. Then why risk it? She asked, though she did not pull her hand free. Because some hungers cannot be denied, he said quietly, no matter the cost. His thumb traced a small circle at her wrist. And because I have seen too much death to fear anything more than a life never lived. The truth of it echoed inside her. Elara had been raised on caution and propriety, taught that safety lived on well-worn paths. Yet standing there, her hand in his, she felt more alive than in all her careful years combined. A distant gunshot cracked the air. Tarek was on his feet instantly, listening. After a moment, his posture eased. Hunters, he said, but a reminder. The world does not pause for us. Elara stood, brushing dust from her riding skirt. I should go. They'll worry if I'm late again. He nodded, then caught her hand once more as she turned away. Tomorrow? The word carried more than a question now. It was a crossroads. Tomorrow, she promised, and it felt like stepping off a cliff into open sky. The Voss home was the grandest in Willow Creek, a 2-story house with real glass windows and a broad porch that wrapped around 3 sides. As Elara sat stiffly in the parlor beside Maeve Whitlock, listening to Major Garrick Voss discuss territorial politics with Orson Whitlock, she felt as though she were watching the scene from far away. The Apache problem will be settled within 2 years, Voss was saying, swirling brandy in a crystal glass. General Aldrich Monroe has a new strategy. The hostiles will be contained or eliminated, and the rest properly placed on reservations where they can be civilized. Excellent news, Orson said with approval. Hard to conduct commerce with savages roaming the hills. Bad for business, bad for progress. Precisely. Voss turned his attention to Elara, his smile sharp, his teeth too white, too perfect. And somewhere beyond the walls of that fine house, the creek kept flowing, unchanged, indifferent, waiting. At 35, Garrick Voss cut a striking figure, handsome in a hard, disciplined way. His uniform sat flawless on his frame, every line pressed sharp, his posture unyielding even at ease. Miss Whitlock, he said smoothly, I was hoping you might accompany me to the Founders' Day celebration next weekend. There will be music, dancing. Elara felt Maeve Whitlock's approving glance before she heard her voice. That's very kind, Major, but She would be delighted, her mother interjected, without missing a beat. Wouldn't you, dear? Cornered, Elara lifted a practiced smile. Of course. The Major's satisfaction was immediate. Splendid. I've taken the liberty of ordering sheet music from back east. Perhaps you might play for us after dinner. I'm told you're quite accomplished at the piano. As the evening wore on, Elara performed her part with precision. The polished daughter, the promising bride, the quiet figure in a negotiation where her worth was understood by everyone but herself. Her fingers moved obediently across the ivory keys, while her thoughts drifted far from the parlor, to a creek bank, to roughened hands, to words spoken without disguise. When the Major finally prepared to leave, he caught her alone in the hallway. You seem distracted tonight, Miss Whitlock, he observed, his eyes keen. I trust I haven't given offense. Not at all, Major, she said, gaze lowered as expected. It's the heat. It leaves one rather languid. He stepped closer, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his stare. I've spoken with your father about my intentions. He is agreeable. Alarm fluttered in her chest. Sir, There's no need for discussion just yet, he interrupted, lifting a hand. These matters should proceed with decorum. Still, I wanted you to know I see in you the qualities of an officer's wife: poise, obedience, refinement. You would do well in Washington when I receive my next posting. Washington, she echoed faintly. Of course. A man of my record won't remain in this dust-blown territory forever. His smile never reached his eyes. You'll have a fine home. Servants, society, everything a woman could wish for. Everything except freedom, she thought. Everything except choice. You honor me, Major, she managed, the words hollow on her tongue. Satisfied, he took her hand. His touch was cool, exact. Nothing like the warmth that had coursed through her that morning. When he brushed his lips across her knuckles, she fought the instinct to pull away. Until the celebration, he said, departing with the sharp click of polished boots on wood. Maeve emerged from the parlor, her face alight. Very well done, Elara. Did you notice how he looked at you? By Christmas you could be engaged to the most eligible man in the territory. Elara said nothing. Her hand still felt cold where the Major's lips had rested. In the quiet of her own heart, she made a choice that would have horrified her family had they known. Tomorrow, she would ride to the creek again. And this time, she would not pretend what she felt for Tarek was mere friendship. Some prices were worth paying, even if the cost was everything she had ever known. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of secrecy and tightening tension. Each morning, Elara slipped away to the creek where Tarek waited. With every passing day, their bond deepened, conversation giving way to tentative touches, his fingers brushing a loose strand of her hair, her hand tracing the scar along his jaw, their palms meeting beneath the broken shade of cottonwoods. They spoke of impossible things, of worlds where skin color carried no sentence, where old wounds might mend, where they could simply exist together beneath the vast Arizona sky. Tarek taught her words from his language, names for sunrise, for eagle, for the hush that settles just before rain. She taught him to read from a slim book of poetry smuggled from Orson Whitlock's shelves. It was reckless, foolish, and more real than anything Elara had ever known. In town, however, the whispers grew louder. Settlers spoke of Apache raids, burned homesteads to the north, missing cattle, supply wagons found wrecked along the trails. Military patrols increased, riders moving out daily. Major Voss became a frequent presence at the Whitlock home, his courtship now openly acknowledged, his conversation consumed by talk of the Apache threat. On a sweltering afternoon in late August, Elara stood in the store arranging tins of preserved goods while her father reviewed the monthly accounts. The door burst open and a rider stumbled inside, dust-streaked and breathless. Attack at the Calder place, the man gasped. They're all dead. Man, wife, children. Looks like Apache work. Orson was alert at once. When? Likely last night. Found them this morning when Calder didn't show for a lumber delivery. The rider wiped sweat from his brow. Major Voss is gathering men. Says it's time to end this for good. A cold weight settled in Elara's stomach. The Calders kept a small ranch 10 miles north, a decent family with 3 young children who sometimes came into town for supplies. I'll fetch my rifle, Orson said, already moving for the stairs to the living quarters above the store. Father, wait, Elara called, hurrying after him. Shouldn't we let the army investigate properly? Be certain it was Apache? Orson turned, his expression hard. 5 white settlers are dead, Elara. Who else would it be? He studied her then, his eyes narrowing with sudden suspicion. Why would you even question it? Orson Whitlock demanded. Your sympathy for savage killers is unsettling. I only meant it seems reckless to accuse without proof, Elara Whitlock said, her voice faltering under his stare. Enough, he replied coldly. Stay here with your mother. Lock the doors after I leave. Within the hour, nearly 30 men gathered in the town square, soldiers, ranchers, merchants, armed, mounted, restless. Garrick Voss stood at their head, calm and commanding. As the column prepared to ride, he approached the store where Elara lingered in the doorway. Don't trouble yourself, Miss Whitlock, he said, uniform spotless despite dust and heat. We'll see to your safety. By tomorrow there will be fewer Apache to trouble decent folk. Which band do you believe responsible? She asked, steadying her breath. Does it matter? He tugged on his gloves. But if you insist, our intelligence suggests a group from the White Mountain Reservation has gone rogue. Scouts tracked them east into the canyons. White Mountain. Tarek's people. Elara gripped the doorframe to keep from swaying. Surely not all of them, she said. When vermin infest a house, Voss replied coolly, one doesn't pause to ask which rat gnawed the grain. The lesson must be unmistakable. The men rode out with shouts and gunfire, firing into the air as if already celebrating. Elara retreated into the store, her thoughts racing. She had to warn Tarek, had to reach him before Voss and his men did. But how? She couldn't ride out openly, not with the town bristling for blood. Night crept in at a torturous pace. Elara moved through supper and chores like a ghost, murmuring an excuse about a headache before retreating to her room. She changed into her riding clothes and waited by the window as lamps across town winked out one by one. Just past midnight, when even the saloon had fallen quiet, she slipped down the back stairs and into the stable behind the store. Her mare nickered softly as Elara saddled her, hands shaking. The sky was clear, stars scattered like salt across black velvet, the half-moon giving just enough light. She rode hard, faster than was wise, following the creek upstream toward the foothills. The path to their meeting place felt strange at night, full of shifting shadows and unseen dangers. When she reached the cottonwoods, she dismounted, legs trembling. Tarek, she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the water. Tarek, are you here? Only silence answered. Hope faltered. How foolish to expect him at their place in the dead of night. She had no way to find him. No way to... A shadow peeled itself from the darkness. He was suddenly there, as if the night had given him form. Relief flooded her, followed instantly by fear. What are you doing here? Tarek demanded, tension tight in his voice. It's dangerous. I had to warn you, she said, stepping closer. There was an attack on a homestead, the Calder place. Everyone is dead. Garrick Voss is leading men to hunt Apache from White Mountain. They believe your people are responsible. Tarek's face hardened. The Calders are dead, he said quietly. Yes. Was it your people? No. The answer was immediate. We have been on the reservation. Those who left went north, far from here. His eyes narrowed. When did this happen? Last night, they think. Impossible. His voice sharpened. I was with Sylvan Mar until sundown yesterday, speaking about rations. No warriors could ride that distance and return unseen. He seized her arm. Elara, this is wrong. Something else is at work. She believed him without hesitation. Then who? She asked. I don't know. But Voss has wanted an excuse to strike us for months. The reservation holds water rights his friends want. He released her and began to pace, coiled and urgent. I must return. Warn the others. The women and children will be defenseless if soldiers come in force. I'm going with you, Elara said, the words spilling out. Tarek stopped short, staring. You cannot. My place is with you, she insisted, the truth settling deep in her bones. I can help. I can speak to Voss. Make him listen. He will not listen to a woman, Tarek said bluntly. And if you are seen with me, they will call you a traitor, or worse. She knew he was right. Yet the thought of returning to town, of waiting helplessly while violence unfolded, was unbearable. Then let me come part of the way, she pleaded. I'll stay hidden. The creek whispered beside them, indifferent and unyielding, as the night closed in, and the choice before them sharpened into something that could not be undone. I can't ride back and act like I saw nothing while they hunt your people, Elara Whitlock said. Tarek studied her in the moonlight, the struggle plain on his face. At last he gave a single hard nod. Then we ride. Now. Fast. Quiet. They moved through the night, along game trails and dry washes Elara would never have found on her own. Tarek rode ahead, sometimes looping back to read the ground, his movements sure and fluid even in darkness. They spoke little. Twice, when the footing turned dangerous, he reached back to steady her. Brief touches, anchoring her in the spinning dark. Dawn was breaking when they crested a ridge and looked down into a shallow valley. Smoke climbed from a cluster of rough dwellings. The reservation. But something was wrong. The smoke was too heavy, too black against the pale sky. Tarek stiffened beside her. Fire, he said, his voice hollow. The settlement is burning. Without warning, he drove his horse forward, plunging down the slope at a reckless pace. Elara followed more carefully, heart pounding. As they closed in, the destruction came into focus. Structures aflame, people running in wild confusion, gunfire cracking the morning air. Tarek hauled back hard and thrust out an arm to stop her. Stay here, hidden, he ordered. Then, eyes locked on hers, fierce and urgent. If you value my life, stay hidden. Reluctantly, she nodded and guided her mare into a stand of scrub oak that offered cover. Tarek rode on alone, swallowed by smoke and chaos. From her vantage, Elara watched in horror. She could make out soldiers, army uniforms unmistakable, even at a distance. Shots echoed. Figures fell. Somewhere in that nightmare, Tarek was searching for his people, risking everything to save who he could. Movement to her right snapped her attention back. 3 riders approached along the same track she and Tarek had taken. As they drew nearer, ice flooded her veins. Orson Whitlock rode at the front, rifle across his saddle, flanked by 2 men from town. Instinct drove her deeper into the scrub. But too late. He'd seen her horse. Elara? His voice carried across the morning, disbelief hardening into fury as recognition set in. What in God's name are you doing here? He dismounted and strode toward her hiding place, the others trailing warily. Father, please, she said, stepping out. This is wrong. They're killing women and children. The Apache didn't attack the Calder place." "So you've turned traitor," he cut in, face dark with rage, "slipping out to warn them before the justice they deserve." His eyes raked over her riding clothes, her disheveled state. Horror dawned. How long have you been meeting them?" "It's not what you think," she pleaded. "Isn't it?" Orson seized her arm, grip rough. "I've watched you change. Your questions, your doubts. Fool that I am. I thought it was a girl's fancies." He gestured toward the burning valley. This is beyond imagining." "Mr. Whitlock," one of the men barked, pointing downslope. "There, one's coming this way." Elara turned and saw Tarek riding hard toward them, having spotted the confrontation. Terror surged, not for herself, but for him. "Tarek, no!" she screamed. "Go back!" Orson's grip tightened painfully. "You know his name?" Understanding curdled into disgust. "Dear Lord, tell me you haven't." A rifle cracked. One of the men had raised his weapon and fired at the approaching rider. Elara lunged with a cry, knocking the aim aside. The shot went wide, but Tarek saw the threat. He swerved sharply and vanished into a ravine. "Damn it!" the shooter snarled, shoving her aside. "That was our chance." Orson stared at Elara as if she were a stranger. "Get her on her horse," he ordered. "Take her back to town. Lock her in her room until I return." "Father, listen to me," she begged, as the men grabbed her arms. "This attack, it's murder, not justice. The Apache didn't kill the Calders." "Enough," Orson roared. "You've disgraced yourself and this family. When this is over, you'll marry Garrick Voss at once and be done with this place." "I won't," she said, finding steel beneath the fear. "I won't marry a man who slaughters innocents." His hand struck her cheek. The blow shocked them both. He had never raised a hand to her before. For a heartbeat, they stared across a gulf that could not be crossed. "Take her," Orson said at last, his voice cold and final. "Make sure she reaches town." As the men shoved her up onto her horse, Elara Whitlock glimpsed movement along the ridge above. A solitary figure standing watch, too far to intervene, too close to witness her humiliation. Tarek. Their eyes found each other across the impossible distance, a silent vow passing between them. Then he was gone, fading like morning fog, and Elara was being led away from smoke and screams, away from the man who had stirred her heart toward a future that now felt closer to death than life. 3 weeks crawled by in a haze of enforced misery. Elara was kept under constant supervision, her door locked at night, her days confined to the store and the house. Her mother, Maeve Whitlock, shifted between tearful reproach and brisk preparations for a hurried wedding. Her father said almost nothing at all. His silence cut deeper than anger ever could. Across the territory, the slaughter at the reservation was celebrated as a triumph. Newspapers lauded Garrick Voss for his decisive strike against so-called Apache renegades accused of savage settler killings. 27 Apache were listed as dead, the rest driven into the mountains or transferred to distant reservations. There was no mention of women or children. Elara knew better. Of Tarek, there was no word. In the long nights alone, burdened by guilt and grief, she feared he had been lost in the attack. Yet something beneath reason told her he lived. She felt it in the quiet ache beneath her ribs, a certainty beyond logic. Somewhere, he was breathing the same sky, perhaps thinking of her as she thought of him. The wedding date was fixed for October 12th, scarcely a month away. Now promoted to colonel for his heroism, Garrick Voss visited twice each week, speaking coolly of Washington and their future there, never quite meeting Elara's eyes. Whether he suspected her connection to Tarek was unclear, but his manner had hardened. Less a suitor, more a man claiming what was already his. One crisp September evening, As Elara helped close the store, her father finally broke his silence. "The dress fitting is tomorrow," Orson Whitlock said, snapping the cash box shut with careful precision. "Your mother arranged it with Luta Hall." Elara stared down at the ledger, her grip whitening around the pen. "I won't be there." Orson's shoulders stiffened. "This isn't a request. I can't marry him." The words surfaced like stones hauled from deep water, heavy, unavoidable. "You can, and you will." He turned, his face set like carved rock. "Colonel Voss has been generous enough to overlook your indiscretion. Many men wouldn't forgive a woman who consorted with savages." "Is that what you think I did?" Elara lifted her gaze to meet his. "I don't know what you did," he admitted, pain flickering despite himself. "And I don't want to know. I saw enough to know you've kept dangerous company. The Colonel offers respectability, a clean start away from here." "He's offering a cage," Elara said quietly, "and his hands are stained with innocent blood." Orson slammed the ledger shut. "Enough. This territory has no room for misplaced sympathies. The Apache have killed hundreds of settlers." "And how many of theirs have we killed?" she shot back, standing abruptly. "Their children, their elders. The Calder family wasn't killed by Apache. The tracks, the timing, Tarek explained it all. It was a pretext." "Tarek," Orson repeated, the name sour on his tongue. "You say his name like—" He stopped himself. "Like I love him?" Elara finished, the truth breaking free at last. "Because I do." The confession hung between them, irreversible. Orson's face drained of color. "You've lost your mind." "I haven't," she said steadily. "For the first time I see clearly. I won't marry Colonel Voss. Not next month. Not ever." Orson stared at her as though she were a stranger. Perhaps she was. The obedient daughter, the one who kept accounts, played piano for guests, and followed her parents without question, had disappeared somewhere along the creek beneath the cottonwoods. "You have no choice," he said at last, his voice heavy. "Invitations are sent, arrangements made. Our family's standing depends on this." "There's always a choice," Elara replied, thinking of Tarek's words about endurance, about survival even when every road is blocked. Orson's jaw tightened. "You're confined to your room until the wedding. I'd hoped you'd come to your senses. Clearly, stronger measures are needed." As he escorted her up the back stairs, a strange calm settled over Elara. Walls might imprison her body, but her heart was already free, already committed to its path. The wedding gown hung in the corner of Elara Whitlock's room like a burial shroud. Ivory silk brought in at great cost, a restrained train, fine lace edging the collar and cuffs. She refused to look at it as she paced the narrow confines of her room. She filled the hours with the few books she was allowed, watching sunlight shift through windows that never opened wide enough to offer escape. Maeve Whitlock came every day with food and increasingly frantic appeals. "You'll grow to care for him," she insisted one afternoon while arranging flowers on the small table. Flowers meant to soften a cell. "I didn't love your father when we married." "That came later," Maeve went on. "With time, with children." "This is different," Elara said gently. She had stopped arguing days ago, knowing it led nowhere. "Because he's older? Many girls marry men with years behind them. It's sensible." "No, because his hands are stained with blood," Elara said, turning from the window. "Blood spilled for ambition, not necessity, and because my heart belongs to another." Maeve's hands trembled around the flower stems. "This foolish infatuation with a savage." "His name is Tarek," Elara said quietly, "and he carries more honor in one finger than Garrick Voss holds in his entire body." "Honor won't feed you or keep you warm when winter comes," Maeve snapped, her patience finally breaking. Honor won't shield you from the gossip if you refuse the colonel now. Do you think any respectable man will want you after this scandal?" "I don't want a respectable man," Elara answered. "I want a man of courage and truth, someone who sees me as a person, not a possession." Maeve left in tears, as she had every day for a week. That night, when the house fell silent, Elara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the locked door. 6 days until the wedding. 6 days until she would be bound to a man whose touch repelled her, whose triumph was built on innocent dead. A faint tapping at the window broke her thoughts. At first she thought it was a branch stirred by wind, but it came again. Deliberate, measured. Her heart pounding, Elara crossed the room and peered into the darkness. A shape moved below, barely visible in thin moonlight. Then a pebble struck the glass with careful aim. With shaking hands, she unlatched the window and pushed it open as far as it would go. Not enough to escape, but enough to see. "Who's there?" she whispered, though she already knew. A figure stepped into the moonlight. Tarek looked up at her. His face was leaner than she remembered, a fresh scar marking his temple. But his eyes, the eyes that had seen straight through her from the beginning, were unchanged. "You're alive," she breathed, joy and fear colliding in her chest. "I promised I would come back for you," he said simply, as though crossing hostile miles to reach her window were nothing remarkable. "How did you find me?" "I've watched the town for days," he said. "Listened in the saloon." His voice hardened. "I know about the wedding." "I won't go through with it," Elara said, gripping the sill. "But they keep me locked up, guarded." "Then we leave tonight." The certainty in his voice sent a shiver through her. "I have horses hidden nearby, supplies. Where would we go?" "South, across the border. My mother's people have kin in the mountains where the army does not reach." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It won't be easy. It will be dangerous. It won't be the life you've known." "The life I knew is already gone," Elara replied, surprised by the calm in her words. Tarek nodded, needing no further explanation. "Can you climb down?" She studied the window for the first time with intent. It was too narrow, and the drop too far. "No, and the door's locked from the outside. They take no chances since I tried to leave last week." Frustration crossed his face as he studied the building. At last he said, "Tomorrow night. I'll come back with help. Be ready. Bring only what you can carry on horseback." "The store," Elara said suddenly. "The back entrance isn't visible from the street. My father keeps the key by his bed, but there's a loading door barred only from inside." Tarek's eyes flashed with approval. "How do I reach you to open it?" "I don't know," she admitted. "They only let me downstairs for meals, and I'm always watched." She pressed her forehead to the frame, thinking hard. "Wait, tomorrow's Sunday. They'll take me to church. It's the only time I'm allowed out." "During the service?" he asked. "Too many eyes." He shook his head. "But afterward," she said quickly. "When people linger and talk, that's when attention drifts." A plan took shape between them, whispered urgently beneath the indifferent moon, each word a thread pulling her closer to freedom. They covered every detail they could think of, every risk and turn of chance. When they finished, Tarek reached up toward the window. The space between them was too wide to bridge, yet Elara Whitlock leaned down all the same, stretching her hand until their fingers hovered inches apart. An unclosed distance that felt endless. "Until tomorrow," he said, his gaze carrying promises words could not hold. "Until tomorrow," she answered. She watched him fade back into the dark, taking her heart with him. Sunday broke clear and bright, the fall air sharp with possibility. Elara dressed with care in her finest church dress, a modest blue with a high collar and long sleeves. She pinned her hair tight, adopting the meek look expected of a woman soon to be married. When Maeve Whitlock unlocked the door, she found Elara sitting calmly, Bible in hand. "You look better today," Maeve said cautiously. "I've been reflecting," Elara replied, letting the words sit in careful balance. "Prayer has given me clarity." Relief softened Maeve's face. "Your father will be glad to hear that. Garrick Voss will be at the service." "Of course he will," Elara murmured, hiding her revulsion behind lowered eyes. The walk to church was her first breath of open air in weeks. She savored it quietly, the changing gold along the cottonwoods, the town's steady preparations for winter. Orson Whitlock walked beside her, stiff and distant, while Maeve filled the silence with nervous talk of lace and seating. The small wooden church stood at the north end of town, whitewashed and glowing in the morning sun. As they approached, Elara's steps slowed without her meaning them to. Voss waited at the entrance in full dress uniform, greeting parishioners with practiced charm. When he saw her, his smile tightened just a fraction. "Miss Whitlock," he said, taking her gloved hand, "a pleasure to see you looking so well. I trust the preparations are moving along." "Everything is in order," Orson answered for her. Elara has had ample time to consider her responsibilities. Voss's eyes never left her face. "Excellent. Perhaps after the service we might walk together. There are matters regarding our future home." Elara forced a smile. One last performance. "That would be lovely." Inside, the church filled with Willow Creek's respectable citizens. Elara followed her parents to their usual pew near the front, keenly aware of sidelong looks and hushed murmurs. The rumors had been contained, but small towns thrived on whispers. As hymns rose and prayers fell, the words passed over her without taking root. She watched the sun through the open windows, measuring its climb, counting minutes. When the final hymn ended and the congregation began to spill outside, Elara tightened her grip on her mother's arm. "I feel faint," she murmured. "The heat, perhaps. May I sit a while you speak with Luta Hall about the flowers?" Maeve's brow creased. "Of course, dear. I'll tell the colonel you're unwell." "Thank you." Elara pressed her hand, the small deception cutting deeper than she expected. As the church emptied, Elara stayed behind, head bowed as if in private prayer. Through the windows, she saw her parents deep in conversation with Voss and several townsfolk. Perfect, just as planned. She slipped from the pew and moved quietly to the side door that opened into the small garden. No one noticed her leave. All attention remained fixed on polite exchanges at the front. Outside, she kept to the building's shadow, circling to the back where the garden narrowed into an alley. Tarek waited exactly where he had promised, mounted on his paint horse and holding the reins of a second, a sturdy bay mare loaded with supplies. His face showed nothing as she approached, but his eyes sparked with something like pride. "Quickly," he said, lifting her up. Elara gathered her skirts and swung up behind him, riding astride in a way she never would have dared in town. Her dress rode scandalously high at her ankles. Tarek handed her the reins to the bay. "We go to the creek first," he said, "then south along the foothills. Riven's scouts will help us cross." She nodded, words caught in her throat. Tarek guided them through back alleys, skirting the main street where churchgoers still lingered. They were nearly clear of town when a shout rose behind them. "There! Her!" Elara looked back to see one of Bram Yates's clerks pointing wildly, shock twisting his face. In moments the cry would carry, from the alley to the church, to her parents, to the colonel. "Ride," Tarek ordered, driving his horse forward. They burst from the shelter of the buildings into open ground, pushing hard toward the creek trail. Behind them came a chorus of shouts, followed by the sharp crack of a rifle. The shot missed, but its meaning was unmistakable. Their escape would be hunted. Elara Whitlock leaned low over her mare's neck as the wind ripped at her neatly pinned hair, tearing the pins free until pale strands streamed behind her like a flag of defiance. Fear and exhilaration surged together in her blood. She was leaving behind everything she had known: home, family, safety, respectability. Yet with every pounding hoofbeat carrying her farther from Willow Creek, she felt not loss, but release. They reached the creek and turned south, following its twisting course toward the mountains. The land grew harsher here, broken by rock outcrops and thick brush that offered moments of concealment. Tarek set a relentless pace, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every bend and hidden danger. After an hour of punishing riding, he drew them into the shelter of a sandstone bluff and brought the horses to a halt. "They will follow," Tarek said, helping her down. "Your father. The soldiers." "I know," Elara replied, her legs shaking from the strain. "How far to the border?" she asked. 3 days if we push." He handed her a water skin. "2 scouts are waiting near Rattlesnake Canyon. Riven sent them. They'll guide us through the passes." She drank deeply, the cool water steadying her. The weight of what she had done, and what lay ahead, settled over her. "Are you certain?" Tarek asked quietly, studying her face. "You could still say you were taken. They would believe it." The offer startled her. That he would still give her a choice, after all they had risked, told her everything about him. "I have never been more certain of anything," she said, taking his hand. "My life is with you now, wherever that leads." Something softened in his eyes. Relief, perhaps, or simply recognition. He drew her close, resting his forehead against hers, the gesture more binding than any vow spoken in a church. "Then we go on," he said. Together, they mounted again and rode south as the sun slid toward the western hills. The creek cut deeper into the land, shaping a narrow canyon, while far ahead the mountains rose blue and distant, their refuge, their hope. At dusk, Tarek led them into a hidden hollow where a spring bubbled from stone, feeding a quiet stand of cottonwoods and willows. "Here," he said. "We rest until first light." Elara helped unpack the few essentials: jerky, hard bread, coffee, blankets. Her church dress was torn and stained, utterly unfit for what lay ahead. Noticing her hesitation, Tarek reached into his saddlebag and produced a bundle. "I brought these," he said, offering trousers, a plain shirt, and a sturdy jacket. "They'll serve better than that." "Thank you," she said, accepting them gratefully. He turned away with a faint smile, while she changed behind a curtain of willow branches. The clothes felt strange but right, practical, freeing. When she stepped back into view, Tarek nodded. "Now you can ride properly," he said, his gaze warm with respect rather than restraint. As night settled, they built a small, well-hidden fire and shared a simple meal. The sharp edge of their flight slowly eased, replaced by cautious peace as they spoke of what might come, of the community south of the border, of a life built from honesty rather than permission. "It will not be easy," Tarek warned, his face grave in the firelight. "Two worlds meeting never is." "We've already faced that," Elara replied. "At least there, we face it together." "Together," he echoed, threading his fingers through hers. Under the rising stars, the miles ahead felt less daunting. They had already crossed greater distances, between fear and courage, between obedience and truth. Wrapped in a blanket beside the fading fire, Elara drifted toward sleep, thinking not of what she had lost, but of what waited ahead. Not a grand house in Washington, not servants and empty respectability, but a hard, honest life beside a man who saw her fully. Not a gilded cage, but an uncertain freedom chosen with her whole heart. For the first time in her life, Elara Whitlock knew she was exactly where she belonged. Dawn came with the distant thunder of hooves. Tarek was awake at once, smothering the fire and gathering their gear. Elara followed, stiff and sore but alert. "Soldiers," Tarek said after listening. "6 at least, maybe more." "How did they find us so fast?" Elara whispered, tightening her saddle straps. "Garrick Voss knows this land," Tarek replied bitterly, "and he has Apache scouts who trade loyalty for rations and promises." They mounted in a rush, leaving the shelter of the spring behind and pushing into the exposed land beyond. Tarek guided them deeper into the canyon, following a thin game trail that twisted between sheer stone walls. Progress slowed, forcing them into single file, but the winding passage hid them from watchful eyes above. They rode for hours, the sounds of pursuit fading, then returning as the canyon bent and echoed every noise back upon itself. By midday, the heat pressed down hard, sunlight baking the rock until the air quivered. The horses labored, sides slick with sweat. "There," Tarek said, pointing ahead where the canyon opened slightly to reveal a break in the eastern wall. "A way up. If we hurry, we can reach the pine forest before nightfall." As they closed the distance, a rifle cracked. The shot struck stone inches from Elara Whitlock's head. She ducked instinctively, her bay mare skittering beneath her. "Into the rocks," Tarek ordered, already dismounting and freeing his rifle. They took cover behind a fallen boulder, tying the horses in a shallow hollow that offered a measure of protection. From there they could see movement at the southern mouth of the canyon, riders advancing with care, using the terrain just as they were. 4 soldiers, Tarek murmured, and 2 more. Elara's chest tightened. My father, and the colonel. Of course, Orson Whitlock would ride after her, and Garrick Voss would not release what he believed belonged to him. "What do we do?" she asked, steadying her voice. Tarek checked his rifle. "I don't have many rounds. They'll have plenty." He glanced again at the narrow path. "If we reach that trail, we might make it. My brothers are waiting in the forest beyond." "Then we go for it," Elara said firmly. "That means crossing open ground," he warned. "They'll have clear shots." "We don't have another choice." He searched her face for doubt, found none, and gave a sharp nod. "I'll draw their fire. When I do, you run to the horses. Mount and ride for the path. Don't look back. Don't stop." "I'm not leaving you," she said. "You must." His hand closed around hers. "Trust me, Elara. I'll follow." Before she could argue, he stepped out and fired toward the approaching riders. Shots answered at once, bullets sparking off stone. Tarek fired twice more, then shouted, "Now, go!" Elara ran low and fast, heart hammering. She reached the horses, cut the ties, and swung onto the bay. Catching the reins of Tarek's paint, she drove both mounts toward the break in the canyon wall. Gunfire echoed wildly behind her. Every instinct screamed to look back, but she forced herself forward. The trail rose ahead, a narrow switchback climbing toward forest and freedom. She reached the first bend when a familiar voice rang out. "Elara, stop this madness!" Her father stood below, rifle lowered, his face torn between fury and pain. Beside him, Colonel Voss sat rigid in the saddle, lifting his pistol. Not toward her, but toward the ground behind. Elara twisted in the saddle and saw Tarek sprinting across the open stretch, halfway between their cover and the path. Time slowed. She saw the resolve on Tarek's face, the cold calculation in Voss's eyes, the conflict wrenching her father apart. "No!" she screamed as Voss's finger tightened. Orson moved, striking the colonel's arm upward as the pistol fired. The shot went wild, slamming into rock high above Tarek's head. Voss cursed, fighting to recover. But the moment was gone. Tarek reached the base of the trail and started climbing, breath harsh, movement sure. "Go," he called. "I'm right behind you." Elara turned back to the climb, leading the paint as they gained height. Below, voices rose. Her father and Voss locked in furious argument, soldiers waiting for orders. The delay bought them precious seconds. The canyon floor fell away beneath them. Tarek caught up at a wider shelf and vaulted onto his horse in one smooth motion. Dust-streaked and sweating, his eyes shone with fierce triumph. "Your father," he said, astonished. "He stopped the colonel." "He did," Elara answered, just as stunned. "I don't know why." "Maybe," Tarek said quietly. "He loves his daughter more than he hates her choice." The softness passed, urgency returning. "They'll come again. We have to reach the forest before dark." They rode on, climbing steadily as the afternoon waned, the promise of trees and cover drawing closer with every hard-earned step. The air cooled as they climbed higher. Scrub gave way to scattered juniper, then to the first tall sentinels of pine. From time to time they caught sight of their pursuers, tiny figures grinding up the same trail, no longer in immediate danger, yet stubborn as fate. When the sun brushed the western rim of the world, they crested the ridge and entered the pine forest at last, a sweeping cathedral of trees rolling toward far blue peaks. Here, Tarek moved with renewed certainty, reading paths Elara Whitlock could not see, listening to the forest as one who had come home. "We're close now," he told her as dusk deepened beneath the canopy. "My brothers will be watching." As if summoned, two figures stepped from the lengthening shadows, Apache men with rifles, moving with the same quiet assurance as Tarek. Brief words passed between them in their language, too quick for Elara to follow, despite the phrases Tarek had taught her. One of the men motioned them onward, guiding them deeper along a path that seemed to vanish and return with each step. The other slipped back the way they had come. When Elara asked why, Tarek answered simply, "He'll see our trail is broken. Our hunters will find only circles in the dark." They rode through the night, stopping only long enough to rest the horses and share a cold meal of jerky and dried berries. By dawn, they crossed a high pass and began descending towards a hidden valley Tarek said lay less than a day's ride from the Mexican border. As morning filtered through the pines, Elara studied the man beside her. This warrior who had risked everything to come back for her, whose love had given her the courage to leave the only life she had known. Hardship had marked him since she last saw him. New lines at his mouth, a quiet weariness shadowing his eyes even at rest. Yet beneath it all, his nature held fast. Strength, honor, and an unyielding loyalty to the path he chose. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her gaze. "That I would follow you anywhere," she said simply. His expression softened. "Even into a future as uncertain as morning mist? Especially there." She smiled, lightness rising despite their danger. The uncertain path is the only one worth walking. They camped that night in a sheltered hollow beside a clear, still lake. Their Apache guide departed to scout the crossing, promising to return by morning. For the first time since their flight began, Elara and Tarek were truly alone. The immediacy of pursuit held at bay by distance and darkness. By their small fire, the weight of what had happened, and what still lay ahead, settled between them like a living thing. "Are you afraid?" Tarek asked, breaking a silence that had grown warm and easy. Elara considered honestly. "Yes, but not of what's ahead. I'm afraid of what would have happened if I hadn't left. Of the life unlived, the love denied." She met his eyes across the flames. "What about you?" "I have known fear since I was a boy," he said quietly. "Fear of soldiers, fear for my people's future, fear of fading like tracks in sand. He took her hand, his grip warm and sure. Now I fear only one thing, that I will fail to be worthy of what you've given up for me. It wasn't a sacrifice, Elara said gently. It was a choice. My choice. She squeezed his hand. The first real choice I've ever made. Tarek moved then, sitting beside her on the fallen log. His arm slid around her waist, drawing her close in a gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. Elara leaned into him, her head settling into the hollow of his shoulder, as if it had always belonged there. In my language, he said softly, breath warm against her hair, there is a word for when two rivers join and flow as one. Nahaga. It means more than meeting waters. It means they can never be separate again, that together they become something new and stronger. Nahaga, Elara repeated, the syllables sweet on her tongue. Is that what we are? If you wish it. His hand lifted her chin, turning her face until their eyes met. In my way, there are no papers, no crowds. A man and a woman choose to walk together, to be one river. They make the promise beneath stars that do not change. The meaning was unmistakable. Beyond churches and laws, beyond the rules that would have kept them forever apart, he was offering her the most sacred bond his people knew. How does one make such a promise? She asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Tarek smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his solemn features. Stand with me. He rose and drew her up beside him, leading her away from the fire to the lake's edge, where the water lay smooth as polished obsidian, reflecting a sky thick with uncountable stars. Facing her, he took both her hands in his. Beneath the stars that had watched the rise and fall of nations, he began, his voice low and steady in the night air. I, Tarek, of the White Mountain Apache, choose you, Elara Whitlock, to be my wife, my companion, my other self. I vow to walk beside you through every season, to share whatever food comes to my hands, to shelter you with my strength, and to honor your spirit, free and unbroken as my own must be. No border, no army, not even death itself will undo this promise. Like two rivers joined, we flow together toward whatever horizon waits for us. The plain power of his words moved Elara more deeply than any sermon ever could. No document stamped with ink, no crowded ceremony could rival a vow spoken beneath indifferent stars. When he finished, she knew without question that it was her turn. Beneath these same stars that have witnessed our journey, she said, the words rising straight from her heart, untouched by ritual, I, Elara Whitlock, choose you, Tarek, to be my husband, my companion, my other self. I promise to walk beside you in every season, to claim your joys and burdens as my own, and to meet whatever comes with the courage you awakened in me. What I was before is gone, like footprints erased by wind. What I am now, what we are together, is all that matters. Like two rivers joined, we flow together toward whatever horizon awaits. Tarek's hands tightened around hers, his eyes reflecting starlight and something fiercer still. Joy, awe, and certainty braided together. He drew her close, one hand rising to cup her cheek with a tenderness that softened the strength of a warrior. When his lips met hers, Elara felt something settle at last, as if the final piece of a long, unfinished picture had slipped into place. The kiss deepened, months of restraint and separation dissolving into the certainty of their choice. Here, far from judgment and rigid convention, they were free to claim what had grown since that first meeting by the creek. A love that had survived bullets, borders, prejudice, and pursuit. Later, wrapped in blankets beside the revived fire, Elara lay within the circle of Tarek's arms, watching flames flicker against the dark. Tomorrow would bring new trials: the border crossing, the long road to the mountain community, the slow work of building a life between two worlds. But for now there was only his warmth and the unshakable truth that whatever came, they would face it together. "Sleep," Tarek murmured against her hair. "Tomorrow we cross into new lands." Elara closed her eyes, surrendering to exhaustion with the deep trust of someone who knew she was safe. As she drifted toward dreams, one thought remained, not of what she had left behind, but of what lay ahead. Not an ending, but a beginning. Two rivers joined, flowing as one toward an unseen sea. 3 years later, the small dobe house perched on the mountainside seemed to rise from the earth itself. Its walls glowed the color of sunset, its beams weathered by wind, rain, and snow. A garden thrived beside it: corn, beans, and squash in careful rows, medicinal herbs clustered near the doorway, wildflowers blooming wherever they pleased. Inside, Elara hummed softly as she ground corn for the evening meal, the steady rhythm of the metate as familiar now as piano keys once had been. Through the open doorway she could see the valley below, where a small community of Apache and Mexican families tended fields and livestock. Children played in the dusty plaza, their laughter riding the afternoon breeze. Hoofbeats drew her attention. She set aside her work and stepped outside, shading her eyes against the slanting sun. A smile spread as she recognized the rider, Tarek, returning from a 3-day hunt, a deer secured behind his saddle. He dismounted with easy grace, his face brightening at the sight of her. 3 years had changed them both. Elara's skin was burnished by sun and labor, her once soft hands strong and sure. Tarek's features had softened, the constant edge of survival giving way to steadier rhythms of peace. Yet the core of who they were remained, perhaps even stronger for all they had endured together. "A good hunt?" Elara asked as he came to her, his arms opening. "The mountains were generous," he replied, drawing her close before letting go. "Enough to share with Maribel Cruz's family. Her youngest is still ill." Elara nodded, already thinking of which herbs to gather. In 3 years she had learned much from the elders: which plants cooled fever, which eased cough, which drew down swelling. Her willingness to learn their ways, while offering her own knowledge in return, had slowly earned trust among people who had every reason to be wary of a white woman. "I'll prepare a tonic for the child," she said, turning toward the house, "and I'll bring dried apples from winter stores." As Tarek set to work behind the house, Elara gathered her medicines. Their life had found its rhythm. Nothing like Willow Creek, yet richer than she could ever have imagined in those narrow years under her father's roof. There had been hardships. The first winter was brutal, food scarce, the land unforgiving. There were moments of doubt, of homesickness sharp enough to ache in her bones. But those trials had forged something enduring, a life chosen freely, shaped by love, and rooted in a land where 2 rivers had joined and refused to be divided again. There had been friction with some in the settlement, who met her with guarded eyes, seeing only her light skin and the long shadow of soldiers who had driven them from ancestral ground. Yet there were unexpected joys, too. The fierce satisfaction of learning new skills, loom work and planting, shaping earth and thread. The slow confidence of speaking the blended Apache and Spanish that bound the community together. The freedom of living by her own cadence, unpoliced by borrowed rules. Above all, there was the deepening bond with Tarek, strengthened by every hardship shared, every barrier crossed. And then there was the greatest joy of all, the small, flawless life sleeping in the hand-built cradle near the hearth. As if summoned by her thoughts, a soft cry drifted from inside. Elara hurried through the doorway to find her daughter awake, tiny fists protesting the injustice of solitude. At 6 months, Islan was a living bridge between worlds, skin a warm bronze between Elara's fairness and Tarek's darker tone, eyes the same midnight as her father's, yet shaped like her mother's. They had named her for hope, for the future they dared to claim together. "Little one," Elara murmured, lifting the baby to her shoulder. "Papa's back with food for our table. Shall we go see?" Islan settled against the familiar warmth, dark eyes wide and curious, as Elara carried her outside to where Tarek worked. He looked up at their approach, his expression softening into the particular gentleness he reserved for his daughter. "Ah," he said quietly, wiping his hands before reaching out. "The little eagle has awakened." Islan went to him without hesitation, small fingers grasping at the eagle feather still tied at his temple, now a sign of honor rather than defiance. Elara watched them together, the man who had faced soldiers and prejudice with equal resolve, utterly undone by an infant's smile. The sight filled her with a happiness so complete it almost ached. As Tarek spoke softly to Islan in his own language, shaping the words of his people for her young ears, words Elara would later balance with English and the Spanish she had learned, a rider appeared on the trail that led to their home. Elara recognized Thorn Kess, one of the young men who regularly rode to the nearest town for supplies and news. He dismounted with the energy of youth and the urgency of purpose. "Tarek, Elara," he called, "I bring a letter from the north." Elara's heart quickened. 3 years had passed without a word from Willow Creek, from the family she had left behind. She and Tarek exchanged a glance weighted with shared concern as Thorn pulled a worn envelope from his saddlebag. "The American at the trading post, Vaughn Keller, said to be sure it reached you," Thorn explained, handing it to Elara. "Said it came with a man who searched many months to learn where you'd gone." Tarek's shoulders tightened, old vigilance stirring. "What man?" Thorn shrugged. "He didn't stay, left the letter and rode south," they said. After Thorn departed, declining their offer of food with an apology that his mother was waiting, Elara stood with the envelope in her hands. Her name was written across the front in a hand she knew at once, her father's careful script, unchanged by distance or time. "Do you want to be alone?" Tarek asked quietly, still holding Islan, now asleep against his chest. Elara shook her head. "No. Whatever it says, it touches all of us." They sat together on the bench by their door, the same bench where they often watched the sun fall behind the far peaks. With fingers that trembled despite her resolve, Elara broke the seal and unfolded the single page inside. "My dearest daughter, I pray this letter finds you safe and well, though I have no right to expect a reply after all that has passed between us. For 3 years I have lived with the knowledge of my failures. As a father, as a Christian, as a man who believed himself principled. The hardness that drove you away has been my constant companion and my severest judge. Your mother, Maeve Whitlock, passed last winter, peacefully in her sleep. Her last clear words were of you, asking whether any news had come. I could answer only with the truth that haunts me still, that I drove away my only child with blind prejudice and rigid thinking. Willow Creek has changed. The railroad came, bringing new people and new ideas. Garrick Voss was transferred east not long after your departure, following questions raised about the attack on the reservation. The truth of the Calder family murders eventually emerged. It was rustlers from the south, hiding their crimes in the chaos. I have sold the store. At my age, the work became too heavy without family to share it. The new owner is a fair man who employs both whites and Apache, many of whom have returned under the guidance of a new Indian agent, Edwin Lore. a man of genuine compassion unlike his predecessor. I do not ask forgiveness, Elara. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. But I want you to know that your courage, and yes, the courage of the man you chose, forced many of us to examine the foundations of our beliefs. Your leaving cast a stone whose ripples continue to spread. The bearer of this letter was instructed only to deliver it, not to seek your whereabouts. Your safety and privacy remain paramount. But if you should ever wish it, know there is a place for you, for both of you and any family you have made, in what remains of my life and home. With deepest regret for the past and hope for your future, your father, Orson Whitlock. Elara read the letter twice, then passed it in silence to Tarek. As he read, she gathered the sleeping Islin into her arms, studying the child's peaceful face. The living harmony of two worlds, two bloodlines, two ways of being that so many had once insisted could never belong together, had once been declared impossible. When Tarek finished reading, he folded the letter with care and placed it back in Elara's hands. Your father has changed, he said evenly. So it seems. Elara's gaze drifted across the valley, where afternoon light washed over the modest homes and worked fields of their people. I never thought I'd hear from him again. Do you want to go back? The question carried no fear and no pressure, only the steady presence he had always given her, even when her choices might one day pull her away. Elara weighed the question with the seriousness it deserved. Returning to Willow Creek would offer Islin schooling, doctors beyond herbs and tradition, and comforts they had long since learned to live without. It would mean reconciliation with Orson Whitlock, a chance to mend a wound left open for years. But it would also mean stepping back into a world drawn with lines, some visible, others hidden, dividing people by skin, by blood, by means. It would mean exposing their daughter to curious looks at best, to cruelty at worst. It would mean trading hard-won freedom for quiet constraint. No, she said at last, the answer settling deep and sure inside her. My home is here now. With you, with our daughter, with the life we've built. She looked up and found the same certainty reflected in his eyes. But maybe one day we could visit. Let my father meet his granddaughter. Let him see that love can cross even the gaps we once believed were too wide. Tarek nodded, his hand closing gently over hers on the bench. When Islin is older, strong enough for such a journey, if the time is right. They sat together in easy silence as the sun continued west, turning the adobe walls of their home a burnished gold. Islin stirred against Elara's chest, her small face creasing for a moment before slipping back into sleep. He was right about one thing, Elara said quietly after a while. What's that? The ripples. She smiled, thinking of the girl she once was, standing stiffly behind a store counter, afraid to speak her mind or trust her heart. I never imagined that running away could also mean running toward something greater. Tarek's thumb traced slow circles on the back of her hand, the same motion he had made beside the creek when they first named the current pulling them together. My people say the trail is made by walking it. Umbis. We've made quite a trail, she said, leaning into the strength that had never failed her, even in their darkest days. And we'll keep making it, he answered softly, step by step, day by day. As dusk settled over the mountains, they remained there, their small family complete in itself, yet woven into wider circles, the community that had taken them in, the past they had moved beyond, the future opening ahead like an unwritten map. The borders that once seemed unbreakable, between nations, between peoples, between hearts, had proven as thin as morning mist before a promise honored. No border, no army, no death can stop me, he had sworn. He had returned for her, and she had taken his hand and held it through danger and doubt, through grief and grace, through the quiet miracle of ordinary days that make a life fully lived. Together they had crossed boundaries of land and soul and found not an ending, but the true beginning of their story. As the first stars surfaced above the peaks, Elara felt a wholeness beyond simple happiness. This was what it meant to choose with clear eyes and an open heart. This was what it meant to love without conditions or cages. This was what it meant to be free. Two rivers joined, flowing as one toward whatever horizon waited. And to you, listening now, perhaps something in Elara's journey stirred within you. She was not only a young woman who followed her heart. In many ways, she was all of us. At some point, life presses us to choose, to stay or to leave, to remain silent or to speak, to care for others, or finally to care for ourselves. With time, we learn there is no age limit on beginning again, no expiration on freedom, dignity, or love. Elara left behind everything familiar and found herself. In your own way, so have you. Through quiet courage, through loss and healing, you have shed fears and expectations and discovered strength in their place. Youth alone doesn't give life meaning. Wisdom does. Tenderness does. The peace that comes only from having lived, wept, and loved deeply. Whether you're listening in your 30s, your 60s, your 70s, or beyond, remember this. You are not too late. Not for joy. Not for gentleness. Not for love. There is still time to choose what sustains you, to release what weighs you down, to rest deeply and wake lighter. Tonight, may your body find rest, and may your spirit feel seen and safe. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.